Within to Evolve, a series dedicated to the evolution of technology, society, and business. With Aarron Spinley. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. You know, the customer engagement and CRM category has been right on the forefront of society's transformation and our technological advancements. For a long time now, Paul Greenberg has been one of those absolutely essential voices. The fact that he's regarded as, or known as, the Godfather of CRM should probably tell you all you need to know. In 2001, Paul authored the book, CRM Speed of Light, which just became a massive global success, and in fact, it's taught around the world in universities today as a primary text. Paul is well known for his long-running series CRM Players with Brent Leary, shout out to Brent, and more recently joined as well by Brian Solis, so shout out to you as well, Brian. And last year released his book, most recently, The Commonwealth of Self Interest, which I think is one of the most important books in the field today. Now, if you don't know Paul, you're about to meet one of life's good guys. But also Paul's smart, and when he talks, you should listen. So look, I've been looking forward to this show with Paul Greenberg. Okay, well, hey Paul, and welcome to the show, my friend.
Aaron, you know it's a pleasure, man. I love you. I love you.
You're embarrassing me now in front of people. Look.
No, hopefully millions of people, but I doubt it.
Well, look, when I was doing the background work and starting to prepare for this series last year, you were one of the first names on the list and one of the first people to come back and say you were in. So thanks very much. I tend to want to sort of jump into the sort of backstory a little bit. There was one headline that I wanted to call out. It's my favorite one. And I know you're famously called the Godfather of CRM, and that's well-deserved, but it's not that. The one that I loved when I read was that someone called you the Bob Dylan of CRM.
Oh, I thought you were going to say my actual favorite, which wasn't that. That was my second favorite.
That's just
it was called the Mickey Mantle. For those who are American baseball fans, I was called the Mickey Mantle of CRM. Right? And I was one other time, I was called the Walt Whitman of CRM.
Well, look, when I read that, I went, oh man, I got to set myself some new career goals. Like,
well, I mean, to my knowledge, all I am really is the Paul Greenberg of CRM. Right. So, I mean, beyond that, not a whole lot of other things. But but the Godfather one's the one that's stuck. So everyone uses it. It's very popular. I've always been of the mind since I literally am the oldest person I know in the CRM world. I always thought it was actually the grandfather of CRM that somebody misread, right, into Godfather. But it's stuck. But honestly, the secondary ones were the ones I truly loved, right?
Man.
Bob Dylan of CRM was one of them. I get to be CRM's musical poet, man. I mean, who does not want that? And who actually even can imagine that CRM could even possibly have a musical poet, given what it is.
Oh, well, look, I mean, at this stage of my career, man, I'd take the Miss Piggy of something. Like,
Hey, look, I'd still take the Miss Piggy of CRM, too. I'd be happy. No problem.
Like I say, I set new career goals. I figured if anyone called me the Bob Dylan of something, I'd be out, man. I'd retire on the spot. I've been done. Like, where do you go from there?
Well, listen, I mean, do you feel yourself financially secure? Because I'm happy to call you that now, but I don't want you to retire right now if you don't feel ready to get
I've got more to do. I've got more to do.
Okay,
all right.
I won't say it yet.
All right, well, look, there's a whole bunch of folk tuning into this that'll be from the CRM and the whole customer engagement space, and they'll know who Paul Greenberg is, and there'll be some folk that, I engage in a lot of my work around growth strategy with, academics and social scientists and people like that who may not. You sort of hit the scenes early 2000s with CRM Speed of Light. Probably it's where, your persona really started to take more of a public starts, but I'd love to do sort of a behind the scenes special, like who is Paul Greenberg, what led up to that book, and then what's been the journey since then, and where are you at today?
Well, I'll gloss over some of it because
sure.
I am a fount of many stories, not all of that I want to tell. However, I'm looking at it in the, let's call it the 200 million foot view from a galaxy far, far away.
Sure.
I grew up wanting to be a New York Yankee, of course. Remember the New York Yankees. That's why Mickey Mantle's CRM was always my favorite, and he was my hero too. When I was a kid, I realized after a while I was kind of good hit, no field, and consequently was not going to be a New York Yankee. Remember? So I decided I'd be a sports writer because I always was a writer my whole life. Been a writer.
Right.
And I went to Northwestern University, which had the #1 journalism school in the world, and I got there though in '67 to '71, which is right in the heart of the Vietnam War era and the anti-Vietnam War protests and so on and so forth. And being, given my normal demeanor, I took it all away, and I became a hardcore Marxist radical leader of the Chinese communist supporting organization on the Northwestern campus. It was called SDS, Students for Democratic Society. I started out as a liberal, and then I went over to the more Marxist side. I was basically a communist for years, and then I became a capitalist, basically, but still a leftist, but just a capitalist, because I realized it was actually more. It's funny. It wasn't like the stories you always hear. Oh, I was disgruntled by communism. I realized one day it actually doesn't work. While the economic side of it was pretty sound, the actual outcome part, meaning how you're going to go about doing it, doesn't work. So I dropped it, and I became a capitalist, but I stayed in politics for some 20-odd years. There came a point where I recognized, and I was already in my 40s at this point, that I hadn't saved the world that I thought I was going to do by myself, of course. Being one of the young idealists are like that. You really think you're the one who's going to save the world. It turned out I wasn't. Not only was I not the one who was going to save the world wasn't saved at all, right? Period. Everyone combined hadn't been saved. And I left politics, not because I was disgruntled, because my only option, I thought, was going over to the nasty side of politics, the side that our current president's on. And so I didn't want to do that. So you know what? I'll try technology. Got a job building Lotus Notes practices, literally.
Wow.
That was my first technology job. I became director of strategic relations for this little company, $300,000 company. And the other thing we did was the largest notes deployment in the history of notes pilot in the history of notes. 25,000 seat pilot for Hyundai in Ulsan, Korea. And we were good. But I was hired away from that. Lotus is not where to go, so I built ERP practices instead, PeopleSoft and SAP in particular. We already had Oracle practice. And then I was asked to be EVP of this $4 million PeopleSoft higher ed practice, and they said, we'd like you to take us into another direction. I'm looking around for something, what can I do that is also something that actually important and valuable, and what it turned out to be was this thing called CRM. And the reason I liked it is because it was a science of business, and this is the way I used to define it in the earliest days. The only science of business that attempts to reproduce an art of life, which is how human beings interact. And back then it really wasn't that, though, right? Back then it was basically, Salesforce automation. That was it. And but I had loftier goals for it. So but I didn't know anything about CRM other than what I just told you. And so I decided, how am I going to learn about it? I said, you know what? I'll write a book. I'm not kidding. When I wrote the first edition of CRM Speed, I wrote it with no knowledge of CRM whatsoever. I literally just learned it as I went and then wrote it down as I went, right? So, and I convinced Roy Hill that I was an expert, so they published me, and the book, because I happened to intersect at a point when everyone was trying to figure out what it was.
Right.
The book took off because I don't have any particular genius about anything, but the only thing I'm actually good at is simplifying things, right? And I was good at simplifying CRM so people could actually understand what it was because I needed to simplify it for myself. From there on, came up with a new direction. 2002, went out on my own, and here you have it. Now 9 languages, 4 editions later, new book, Godfather of CRM, all that stuff. I don't know how any of that happened. If you ask that part of the story, I can't tell you. It's all a blur. But here it is. So there you go.
It's quite a story, isn't it?
That's the background without the really good stories that are related.
Yeah, we'll do that later over a whiskey.
Yeah, another story.
Yeah. And because this show is, Paul, I've got to say it's hard-hitting, right? We take no prisoners here. So, I've got a big question to ask you, right? And I need the truth. Exactly how many cats do you guys have?
We have 5 indoor, and we have roughly, this is a little hard to give an exact number, 15 to 18 feral cats that live outside in a colony in our backyard. And they are 7 generations in probably on this colony. So it's actually a colony now, meaning cats are born here, and if they're not adopted, they grow up here, and they don't even know that there's much of an outside beyond our backyard. Right? And they have houses, and we feed them every day about 800 times. And we've caught and released most of them, so that most of them are neutered. But, we're very devoted to taking care of all these animals.
All right. Well, look, I think we've got a bit of color now. And we've got sort of the history of Paul Greenberg. We've got the Bob Dylan thing out of the way, which I just needed to get off my chest.
Well, the only other thing of real import is how devoted a New York Yankees fan I am. And that has to be absolutely certain. No one can tell I'm going to stand up for that.
All right, we've got it down. And look, I'll try and put that in the promo reel or something. Anyone that's read your books or read your column on, or listening to CRM players, they will know you're a Yankees fan.
Yeah, well, as you said, there may be psychologists, sociologists who don't know that. And if I have to get one thing across, that's it.
All right. Okay. That's the key message for today, folks.
That's right.
All right. So listen, we've nailed all that down. Let's get into some meat. Let's talk a little bit about what I think probably the CRM and CX people and whatnot have been sitting through this waiting for. I'm really interested in the background. When you did the book, it was 2000. If you look at the sort of CRM and the sort of customer engagement categories, they've just been on a bullet train, right, of an evolution through that period of time. Just a crazy, crazy time. If you could give us a bit of a history lesson.
It's obviously, just to add the one caveat, it's my history of it.
Sure.
Other people might have a whole other version of history.
Sure.
But look, when CRM became popularized, it was really just at the time Salesforce automation, but there was pretensions to it being marketing automation and customer service too, meaning all customer-facing departments of the company. But, it wasn't very holistic in the beginning. Ultimately, it satisfied a need. Sales management needed a way of both organizing and managing their salespeople, needed the data that allowed them to forecast pipelines and begin to look ahead as to how well or poorly they were doing over a period of time. And, because salespeople were and still are generally paranoid about, their jobs, which unfortunately they need to be, they were very protective of their one thing they thought was their leverage, which was their contact databases. And see what SFA did for sales management in the beginning, not for salespeople, was essentially get rid of that leverage, right? Because it exposed the database, contact database, to the entire company and could be built in. But ultimately, it was in its earliest days when it was SFA and it was Salesforce in '99 and SalesNet and companies like that. It was efficiencies. Okay,
Right.
it was based on efficiencies, operational efficiencies and capabilities that improved sales and sales ops a bit more. And it was valuable. It showed its value early, even though obviously adoption was the biggest early problem of CRM and especially Salesforce automation, and still is supposedly the biggest problem, but that's not actually true anymore, even though people keep saying it over and over. It's a 30, what do they call it? It's a 20-year continually perpetrated myth. It wasn't a myth then, it is now. I'm not saying adoption isn't an issue. It is somewhat, but not like it used to be. Second thing was, at a certain point, it began expanding to the other departments. You know, when you had companies like Vantiv, who were acquired by PeopleSoft, and when the enterprise companies began pushing it with Oracle CRM and PeopleSoft CRM, and what SAP at the time pretended was CRM, it began expanding its scope, but not its purpose so much, right? It still stayed somewhat heavily operational in what it was there for, to improve the workings of customer service. So on the customer service side, some of the earliest capabilities you would see would be like case management, right? Things like that. But you didn't see a whole lot of analytics. You didn't see a lot of engagement focused anything, really. There were no actual mature or awareness of mature systems of engagement in the early days, right? It was mostly systems of record, capturing data, and they were passive. They were very passive systems of record. They were really warehouses, So, and it's, for example, you look at the equivalent back then would have been SAP BW, right, which was a good heavy-duty enterprise product, but it didn't do a whole lot in it, really. I mean, if you look at it by comparison to now, let's say, it didn't do a whole lot. It basically took data and put it somewhere so that you could access it in a way that had some organization. And what was the big feature back then? It wasn't analytics, it was reporting, right? So that's why you had crystal reports and everybody integrated with that. You saw that kind of thing. But that was the early days of CRM, but that didn't stay sufficient. As what happened was, even though companies were buying it, and, to that end, if you looked at the revenue curve, the revenue graph of CRM, it's been done, except for the recession in 2008, 2009, where it still increased by 1% and 2%. It's been double digits pretty much the entire time. And Gartner, of course, forecasts it will continue to be. So people listened and adopted it, right? They listened and adopted it because they saw some value in it, even though it was, at the time, it was on-premise, it was clumsy, it was kind of kludgy, difficult to do. But, you get to 2003, 2004, you're starting to see things like the ASP market start to appear. And that was driven by Salesforce, really. Salesforce was the first popular SaaS technology. The ASP market was more hosted, SaaS, kind of almost in between. And, I remember Tom Siebel bought Upshot back then, in 2003, 2004, and it began changing the nature of the market. The reason it was changing was we were undergoing a digital communications revolution at the time, and how people communicated, with what they communicated, their expectations of the communications between them and other people, them and institutions. The way we created, distributed, and consumed information was changing, right? And consequently, those changes started creating a whole new set of customer demands that involved much more real-time activity, more active rather than passive capabilities within the systems. It involved given that the customer at that point, meaning people who were using media that they had control over, was starting to gain control of the conversations between them and other customers applied to those institutions. The institutions were set back on their heels because the customer was saying, I want this, this, and this, and this. But there was another really, really important factor, which most people don't talk about when it comes to CRM, that actually forced CRM to transform temporarily into what we call social CRM, and then once again just CRM, because everything became social CRM. So, and that was this. It was Amazon, it was e-commerce, and it was also, this might sound surprising, courier services, right? The reason I bring that up is, think of it this way. ultimately the value of a CRM system for anybody is, you're acquiring customers who are continuing to transact, and you're servicing those customers as they continue to transact. Acquisition through marketing, and transaction through sales, and service through customer service. The value of CRM is that it helps you do that better. All right.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, that means people are buying things. Historically, department store chains on the retail side had advantage because there were 100 of them, or 500 of them, or 700 of them, and they were in locations all over the place in a given country. And little mom and pop stores, which were 1 and 2 of them, couldn't compete with anything. But then along comes something like Amazon, and Amazon says, no, actually, what we're going to do is you can come online, you can come on the internet and do that. And not only that, we're going to give a marketplace so that these little mom and pop shops can actually compete. They can actually put their stuff on the same thing, and we'll service them, and we'll take a fee, and we'll service them. And then guess what? Macy's or Nordstrom's or whatever, they can compete with you now. And the other reason that they can compete with you is because we have courier services that we can provide them at a reasonable rate. We can support them with, and they can use FedEx, and they can use DHL, and they can use UPS. They can use all these systems to what? Get something to you in a day or two, rather than you have to go to the store to pick it up. And guess what? Nordstrom's, if you're doing online to compete, you're still using the same damn courier service of that mom and pop shop. So you don't have any advantage over them. So all of a sudden, the customer's options became massive.
Right.
The customer was fully aware of it. It's why they felt so empowered, right? I don't need to go to you. I can go to him or her or it or them, right? I can go to them. And guess what? Not only am I empowered, but I can be a jackass sometimes, be entitled, right? And I can make your life miserable, company. Well, that's the problem, of course. There's a difference between being empowered and entitled. And unfortunately, it goes over to entitled. If you look at a lot of historic social media influencers, you get a good idea what entitled means, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm not being a baby boomer who's being crotchety about millennials there. I'm talking about, I don't care what age they are. So.
No, I get it. A lot of my work, I talk about the rise of the ecosystem, right? And figuring out how to effectively ride that wave, because that's what it is.
Yeah. But the problem is, the companies have to deal with that, right?
Yeah.
They have to deal with all of this change. And what does that mean? Well, the customer says, I'll tell you what, I want your products and services still, maybe, but I can get those products and services elsewhere. So you give me something that over time makes me feel really good about my relationship to you, and I'll stick around with you. If I start feeling really bad about it, I'll just go to one of the other places and get it, which is where CX starts coming in, where engagement starts coming in. And where the right brain starts coming in. It's emotional and behavioral. It's not any longer efficiencies and effectiveness based on, organized sets of just simple processes, right? Or complex processes either. And business rules. It's much less operational and more behavioral that you have to deal with. And then because the customer is saying, well, you have to show me something that proves to me that you're giving me things of value, you have to know something about it. So analytics starts popping up. And as you're getting to the 2008, 9, 10, 11 era, you see like SAP made one of the earlier smart moves by buying business objects. Oracle bought Hyperion, and right. They started really, analytics become mission critical to understanding these people that we've got to deal with all the time, whether it's B2B people or and institutions, or it's B2C transactions and consumers, right? We have to understand those people, and then we have to give them something before they get tired of waiting, and get it to them pretty quickly, which is where you start talking about in the late before 2010, roughly, but 2008, 9, and after you start, and even a little before that, you start hearing about journey mapping, right, and starting to understand customer journeys, and that became a big deal. Ultimately, you had to develop technologies that could actually enable all of that. So you've seen technologies over the years, for example, involving, let's say, heavy-duty customer engagement analytics. I mean, SAP made the Qualtrics acquisition, for example, and, Qualtrics' strength was never the surveys. It was the engagement analytics platform behind it. Same with Tableau has a lot of, for example, Salesforce's, expensive acquisition has a lot of on-premise stuff, but they also had the cloud stuff. But ultimately, the power of it is engagement analytics, right? And those kind of analytics, right? The kind of analytics to say, okay, customer individual and customer groups and customer demographics and customer slices and so on, customer clusters. We're going to figure out what it is what kind of insights we need to understand you, then offer you things that will make you feel not only that you've got something of value to you, but feel valued because we're thinking about you, right? And that's what customers are looking for. The overarching experience over time is a great customer experience, but you're looking at it at the level of of customer engagement, which means as customers are interacting with the institution, that these things are going on, where you're not only identifying the behavior, but you're offering them based on the identification of behavior, what you're able to offer as a constrained company to begin with, what you're able to offer them that makes them feel valued by you, right? And that has to be done in real time. And then all that data has to be captured, put somewhere, analyzed, looked again, and then it has to keep going. So we're now dealing with real time and activity. And past 2008, 2009 was the pivot point for that. Came because of social CRM. That's why at the time you'll see a distinction that me, Brent Leary, and others made between social CRM and CRM. Right? That distinction was important for one reason. There was a lot of still traditional CRM at that point, the old, 3-pillar versions of CRM. Now everything is social CRM as far as CRM goes, right? So, and we've gone beyond it. In fact, anybody who still calls this stuff social CRM, which is a lot of companies, has no clue what they're actually talking about. Right. All CRM is social CRM right now. There isn't a product out there that doesn't integrate social channels for interaction and communication. Not a one. We evolve this. We come to these big CRM products. And SAP had Bob Stutz do it in 2007 for your first real one. Now he's back, evolving CX. And one thing I'll tell you about Bob Stutz is he literally never fails. So, literally never. Got, the guy in the CRM technology side of the house in this entire universe. So, the thing is that that all these big enterprises now all have CRM systems, right? But now they're looking for more. They're looking for systems of engagement. They're looking for the analytics and the insights. They're looking for real-time optimization. They're looking for journey orchestration, things like Thunderhead does. They're looking for these kinds of things. Right. So that they can understand customers in real time at a macro level and a micro level. The funny thing about it is the core CRM stuff has evolved back to operational. Yeah. But core CRM is just early operational again. But the difference is back then, in the early days, it was nice to have. Now it's absolutely need to have. There's a lot of value add pieces to the market. So for example, sales compensation, sales enablement, sales onboarding, web self-service, agent desktops that are tied to voice, chatbots, on the marketing side, I've given up on even trying to understand what the hell that MarTech landscape is. It's just a new world, but it's a world where CRM becomes the operational core for a much larger customer engagement market that's beginning to evolve. It's not there yet.
And I think this is where definitions start to become important, right? And, categories and being accurate around some of this stuff becomes important. I know during the watch list work that you're just sort of concluding, you made some comments around, some confusion between product types or categories. And I know that, in many ways in any industry, when they get the language right, when they get consistency of definition and distinctions, that's really important as part of their maturity and such like. But again, we've been on this bullet train that we've seen this massive evolution as we move more into how we engage with customers, and we've tried to become more human, in the way that we drive our interactions and be more relational. Trying to do that at scale means we've needed a whole lot of new technology innovation. And so we've seen a lot of that sort of muddying of the waters between, your sort of core CRM category and the sort of emerging or emerged, customer engagement category. And people are still confused about that. What do you see as important in those distinctions, or what do you think?
Well, the bigger point of confusion is actually not between CRM and customer engagement as it is between CX, customer experience and customer engagement.
Right.
What most companies are calling CX isn't CX. It's engagement. Here's the thing. Ultimately, you're dealing with how people feel about things. Okay, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
And that's the most important thing anyone can keep in their head, that I don't care what you're talking about when it comes, even your KPI definition, what you think are KPIs and your definitions of your ROI and your whatever, your numbers, your math and your goals for a year are all based on how you feel. They're not based on just the numbers, right? The shareholder value, what are you trying to do? Please shareholders. Please is emotional, right? And the number is the number. I mean, it's just you do a $500 million is the number that pleases your shareholders. And then the next year, the same number, it's still the same number, doesn't please your shareholders. Why? You didn't grow. But let's say you grow to 600 million. And the shareholder said, oh, we thought you'd grow to 700 million. They're not happy. And that's the thing. They're not happy. And then what happens? CEOs worry about their job. It's not like they sit there and do math and figure out my job is in jeopardy. They sit there and think, oh, crap, I'm going to lose my job, right? It's more like that. Right. It's not, believe me, there's no abacus being drawn on here or algorithms being run, right? It's feelings. All right, if you understand that everything we do is driven by feelings, right? One way or the other. Yeah. Look at how a customer works with a company. Over time, they feel something about that company after a series of interactions and transactions and the interactive as parts of the transaction. Meaning, I am a customer. I interact with this company. Over time, I've had a lot of bad interactions with this company. I don't like this company. Right now, there's two big things. I just said two things in there. The first one, interactions with the company that went bad, that's engagement, right? And we'll get to the definition in a minute. I don't like this company, that's experience. That's customer experience, right? Yeah. You are trying to create a good customer experience over time. Guess what? No technology company can enable that. You can't enable how someone feels over time about a company with technology. It's a feeling. Now, the interactions can be enabled by technology. So, for example, definition. What's the definition of technology? Well, you're Bruce Temkin of the Qualtrics Institute and me, slightly separately, but combined, I'll use my definition just because I remember mine better than I remember his. But it's the same thing. How a customer feels about a company over time. Bruce's is something like the perception of a customer about a company.
Right, yeah.
And that is over time. There's another part to a customer experience, which I call consumable experiences. Those are the things that when you hear the experience economy being expounded, those are the things that Joe Pine talks about in his book in 1998, 2011, and now 2019, the experience economy. He created the term, and he's talking about created experiences. So that would be Disney. Going to Disney is the perfect example.
I think it's his favorite example, right? We just had him on the show, actually, talking about the experience economy.
Joe, by the way, is, aside from being the guy you want to have, so Joe, I'm glad he was on the show. I have to watch that one. By the way, he's also, just so you know, a huge New York Yankees fan. I want you to understand that.
Gotcha.
Okay, so it shows Yankees fans gets you in a pretty good position.
Yeah, I'm learning.
Right?
I feel like I need to buy a cat.
I'll tell you what, when you come to the U.S., I meet you, I'll give you one. Anyway, but engagement is those interactions that lead to that overarching experience. So, and my definition of engagement is the ongoing interactions between company and customer offered by the company, chosen by the customer.
Yeah.
Took me a year to come up with that definition, as short as it is. And,
I want to talk to you about that because in the book you labored, and we'll get to Commonwealth of Self Interest, but in that book you labored over trying to get to this definition. I laughed because you first checked out Wikipedia, who said that the definition of customer engagement was the engagement of customers.
Yeah. Dumbest thing I literally have ever seen in my life. I mean, wow, that is so wow. Whoever that was a real wizard.
You went through a few folk, right? You looked at Don Peppers and Martha Rogers, and their book Extreme Trust was really important to me a few years ago when I was researching in that space.
You should get them on the show, by the way. They're great people. They really are. They're fantastic. Look, the first thing I ever did with anybody was in 1998. No, it was 2000. I went down to Morton Street at an SAP studio, and me and Don Peppers did like a TV show together.
So this is one of these stories that you've got up your sleeve.
Oh, I got so many more than that, man.
Yeah.
So many more than that.
Well, you went from them to Richard, and I'm checking out my notes here, to Richard Sedley and then Eric Peterson,
Yep.
and later you cite Thunderherd's Phil Venville on his Engage One framework,
Right.
all of whom you pay a lot of respect and homage to.
Especially Phil.
You didn't feel like it quite got you there, right? You felt like the industry needed something, and so you offered this new definition.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are other definitions that are probably perfectly valid, but, for the purposes of what I thought the changes we had to actually pay attention to, it seemed to be the most valid because of two things. One is, to the point of all psychologists and social psychologists and sociologists listening to this show and anthropologists, it was directly, my definition is defined by a very specific area of human behavior, right? And it's actually the one thing that all 7.5 billion people on the planet have in common, which is we want to be happy.
Yeah,
that's the one thing. There's nothing else we have in common, really, except that. And on that journey to happiness, we also want to be happy. I mean, there's no point in being miserable on your path to happiness, right? So, well, I guess if you're into S&M, then it's probably good to be on your path to happiness, right? So here's the thing. The thing that makes us happiest on that journey is as much control over that journey as we possibly can have. We can't have absolute control. Nobody can. And just there are things in life that you can't control, that are bigger than you and that are uncontrollable because it's other people doing things, right? So you have 100% control over your life. You're bound to impose on somebody else by doing that. So nobody has absolute, but you can control a pretty decent amount of your path. And if you think about it, the more control you have over your interactions, the better you feel about yourself and about who you're interacting with. Look, perfect example, get to Disney, right? It's a historic example, but it was probably close to 14, 15 years ago. Disney Destinations was undergoing I'll call it a revenue glitch. And they were trying to figure out why they were having so much problem. And, it's the vacation arm. And they did, Disney, as you well know, is really a data company when it boils down as much as anything else. And they did their, due diligence. They found that one of the things that was driving the vacationers to be crazy was the complexity of vacations and the fact that they had to deal with travel agents for just hours on end to try to figure out how to get these vacations to work for the 2 adults and the 2 children. And by the time they were done finally getting it to work, they were totally enraged and exhausted and needed to schedule their vacation just to get over that, right? Nice. So Disney said, all right, you know what, let's do this. Let's put it online. And so they put up a site, for Disney's Destinations. And again, my year is probably off, but the story isn't. They put up a site where you can, of course, plan your own vacation. And, in the middle of it, if you wanted to, or a third of the way through, you could hit a save button, leave, come back. And let's say what was ever in your basket, if there was a change in price, you'd be aware of it. There would be recommendations based around that, and so on and so forth. And then you could finish it at your leisure as you went through. Needless to say, wildly successful and began to help solve the revenue glitch they had. There was the most important single thing they did there, that they could save the thing. There was a save button. That was mission critical. Why? Because they had control over the vacation that way. Complete control. You're trying to communicate with a travel agent. The travel agent has control over it, not you, right? And because you don't know enough to have control over it. So this way you had control. And that's the key, that the customer is given choices that are relevant to them within the constraints that the company can offer, which is what analytics are for, to figure out within our constraints, what are the things that the customers will feel valued if we offer them. And then the customer gets to choose from those things that are offered. And that's a very simple formulation of it all, because it's obviously complex given every customer has a different idea of what that is, but it's all doable. And if you give the customer choice and you're operating with your own constraints, you're not going to go bankrupt. You'll do well on the one hand, and on the other hand, the customer will be happy because you're showing them that you value them, which is what customer value is. Customer value is feeling valued. That's customer value.
Exactly. Look, I think
that's how engagement works.
Yeah, and it becomes relational, and therefore it becomes personal, right? And I know both you and I have written articles recently about personalization and about, you did one about becoming channelless, and I want to unpack that a little bit as well. I think folk are interested in that, and some perhaps aren't quite there yet. We've had channels, and then we've had multi-channels, and then this term omni-channel was sort of used and abused for a long time. And now there's this notion where, we're just connected, right? We just are. We're just connected, and we have a conversation, and it just spans wherever we are, on whatever device we're on, and whatever channel or pathway we're consuming at the time, and we're just connected. And so we have this notion of becoming channel-less. Could you just expand a little bit for that and for folks?
I thought you just did a great job. That was a great, but look, here's the deal. Ultimately, no one thinks in channels. No one's like, you remember the early days, we talked about multi-channel, right? That was the first strategy we used to talk about. And what was that? You need to take a look at an array of channels and find out from our customers which channel optimally is the one that they want to all be on. And then we develop that channel.
Right.
Then we move to a horribly named but much more valid way of thinking of things, because that one sure didn't work, which was omni-channel, which is kind of where we still are theoretically, which says, you know what, the customer is going to communicate on multiple channels that we really can't totally figure out. There's no one optimal channel, and consequently we have to make sure that we are providing what we need to provide to make sure that when the customer wants to communicate with us on this channel, they can. And when they want to communicate with us on 5 channels, they can. And when they want to communicate on 7 channels, they can. Nonetheless, that's not how a customer thinks about it. We think in a channelless way, right? That's the thing. Look, I have a niece, when she was 18, which was 5 years ago, we decided to give her a laptop for her birthday. She sent me a regular tweet and says, "Hey, Uncle Paul, what's your cell number? I need to call you." And then hashtag love my uncle, hashtag miss you guys. She's one of those kids, 140 characters, 130 hashtag that. Right. Yeah. So I DM her my cell number. So I don't hear from her for a little bit, and a few hours, several hours. So I'm on Facebook. She said, "Oh, you know what? I'll message her on Facebook, see if she'll respond." So she responds. I said, "Hey, did you get my DM in response of my cell number in response to your tweet?" And she goes, "Yeah, I got it. I'll text you." And I said, "Okay." And so I want you to stop there for a second and think about that. I'm on Facebook talking about a phone number that she had asked me about on Twitter, and that she is then going to send me, mentions on Facebook that she's going to text me. That's 4 channels in that communication without even thinking about that. So she texts me, and the conversation is basically around when we're going to talk on Skype. The whole thing. And then we get on Skype and we talk, and then we go to the store. 2 more channels, Skype, Live, IRL, right? So That's 6 channels. Now, what I've often mentioned is people will say to me, well, she's a digital native. And I say, hey, folks, I'm on friggin' Medicare. And I do this without thinking about the channel too. So there's nothing to do with your age here. Yeah. We're just connected and we don't think. And that 6 channels is the example of channel-less.
Yeah.
There's nothing about channels even being considered in that conversation other than normal communications media that we're communicating on to make it convenient for us to do what it is we got to do.
100%. And this is where this notion of conversational UI comes in. And I sometimes find that a funny term, because having a conversation with a customer is what business was supposed to be about. And as we adopted digital technology, we somehow forgot that we're having conversations and we started getting infatuated with channels and this kind of thing. I absolutely want to talk to you about the Commonwealth of Self Interest. And I was curious on a personal front, first of all, when you've had such success with CRM Speed of Light, what was behind your sort of motivation to write another book, to get back on the saddle, but also the motivation for this book in particular?
Well, part of motivation, I was sick of writing CRM Speed of Light. I was just sick and tired of writing that damn book, man. I wrote 4 editions of that book, and they were all like new books. No, the second one was kind of a big update, but the 3rd and 4th editions, which were like close to 600 and 800 pages respectively, were brand new books. And I was so sick of writing them. That was one thing. And the market changed a lot. And I thought I had to get on top of the market and understand it and then present it so that people could get a grasp, because I was getting inquiries from everyone. What does this mean? What is the social stuff? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I decided, all right, well, I have a thing about getting ahead of markets. Right? I work on it. I have a theory I actually function on called anomalies. But basically what I do is this. I'm never on the lookout for what is. I'm always on the lookout of what's going to be. And the way I look out at it is I look and I see something, a really interesting thing. And then I look underneath it to see if it's just bubbles or it's got cement foundation. If it's got cement foundation, I don't only take note about it, I start investigating deeply. Now, social CRM was one of those things, right? Social was one of those things. At first, it was just some people were using it, and then all of a sudden it was a thing, and then it became something I needed to get ahead of, so I did. That was the 4th edition. As we got closer to 2014, I began realizing, holy cow, CRM is morphing, e-commerce is growing, and customer engagement is becoming a subject of importance. So I started to dig into it and realized and found a lot of things out about it that made me think, wow, this is the real deal. Even though it's not the technology deal per se, it's the real deal when it comes to strategic thinking about how you're going to acquire and retain a 21st century customer, because not what you did for a 20th century customer. Right. And so I began digging in, and then all of a sudden it started coming together, and I began digging in further, and then I began seeing a really odd trend in the tech world. The rebranding of an enormous number of companies around customer engagement, and markets beginning to disappear, like the enterprise feedback market disappeared and went to engagement, and companies got acquired, but they became engagement. Like or companies changed their marketing. Perfect example of a marketing change, Marketo, right? Marketo changed from revenue performance management, which is a ridiculous name, even though they were actually onto something, but it was a ridiculous name, to engagement marketing, right? And I began really digging, and I said, holy crap, there's something really big going on. And I began looking into it and found out, not only is there something really big going on, but it's actually, if you really dig at this, you'll find that the systems of engagement are beginning to grow. The need for knowing customers was absolutely fundamental, even though it was translated in a very localized way around personalization.
Right.
But it was much bigger than that. And then I began saying, I got to write about this. And not only I have to write about it, I have to write about it and put it in a way that it can be used effectively as a handbook to think about customer engagement as a strategy, program, and its execution at a company.
Yeah,
and what that actually means.
And I think in my humble opinion, I think it absolutely lived up to that. I remember when I first got the book, sending you a photo of me holding it because I was super excited to get it. And part of it is, to be honest, I wanted to see if the book could live up to the title. What I found in reading through it is handbook's actually the word I would use to describe it. That I think for me it was the first book that connected a lot of what was happening societally. And you talk a lot about the communications revolution and how that's changed us as humans. As kind of the way you preface getting into okay, so what does this mean technologically, and what does this mean strategically, and you answer those questions. You also bring in a whole lot of thought leaders and people that are deep in particular domains to add their flavour to it.
Yeah,
which I think adds that colour and that richness, because you're getting practitioners and you're getting people that have researched spaces for quite a long time. So for those that haven't read the book yet, explain, because like I say, it's not just a great title, but I think it's a really cool subject or concept. Explain the Commonwealth of Self Interest.
Every human being on the planet is also self-interested, not selfish, self-interested. That's what the happiness thing is, right? They want to go through it. We have one life, and I'm sure there's plenty of people who debate that with me, but we have one life as far as I know, and as far as I'll ever remember, probably. And that life, in that life, I'd like to leave a legacy that said, Paul was a good person, and he helped, and part of what that means is what am I saying? That's what I want. Why? Because that's what makes me happy, right? People say, well, how do you say Mother Teresa was self-interested? She was selfless. And she was selfless. But selflessness is what made her happy, and that was why her self-interest was satisfied. Everybody is self-interested. It's part of being an individual. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. In a business environment, what's that self-interested human being looking for as a consumer in either a B2C or a B2B environment? Because, even in a B2B environment, it's still an individual who's looking for something that makes them feel valued in some way. Here's the thing. So I'm a company. I'm constrained from the day I'm born, right? The day I'm born as a company, I'm constrained by law and regulation. I'm constrained by finances. I'm constrained by time. I'm constrained by labor. I'm constrained by multiple things. And those constraints never go away. I am born constrained, live constrained, and hopefully if I have to die, I will die successful by constraint. No matter what, I'm constrained. That means when it comes to your customers, especially when you grow, you can't give them everything they want, right? It's not going to happen, ever. That's why delight is such a joke as a actual strategy. It's good to do on occasion, right? That's the whole idea of delight, is occasionally you feel you do something wonderful. Yeah. If you're trying to do that all the time, you're a moron, right? So, well, it's ridiculous. You're out of business in no time. So, but what you do is, how do you then, if you're not being delightful, and at the same time you're constrained, where you can't give everything to everybody, how in the hell do you satisfy the self-interest of a customer? And if you're Citigroup, you have 200 million of them. How do you satisfy that?
Right.
Well, here's the thing. This is where technology does come in, and engagement, when it comes to engagement. We have lots and lots and lots of data on individuals that is out there. And a lot of them are allowing us access via, accepting cookies and doing all these other things they're doing. And also just by their communication in social channels, public social channels, right? And by transactions with the company that's looking for the data, right? And by reviews that they leave on sites. We have lots of data. Now, the interesting thing about 200 million customers is if you realize that, well, we're constrained, we can only offer really a maximum of 100 things, whatever those things are. It could be products, services, could be experiences, could be just, personality interactions, but 100 things. What you realize is, oh, well, you know what? Each of these customers may have a different path, a different journey, different idea of their likes and dislikes, but there's enough of them that are common, that are generally common, to actually take care of a lot of those customers and make them feel valued because you're providing them something that's relevant to them, right? So, for example, the 167 million of those 200 million might actually feel good about being offered 78 of the 100 things you can offer. And some of them will see of that 70 and say, oh, yeah, that one, that one, that one. Another one will say, oh, that one, that one, that one. Another one will say this one, that one, that one. They'll all pick different ones, which gives them control over the choice, which is the key to this. But at the same time, each one of the things that they're picking is something that's meaningful to them. And in the meantime, it's within the constraints that the company has to make that offer. That's done through data and analytics and insight. Now, the next part of that is the real-time part of that, right? Because customers at this point, that's why journey orchestration is so important when it comes to actual engagement platforms as opposed to renamed and rejiggered CRM platforms. Journey orchestration is the key to engagement platforms, things like that, understanding them and doing something with that. Why? Because the customer's acting in real time. And, maybe that they're done with whatever it is that day, but they're going to be back. But they're acting in real time across multiple areas that your company can see. And you have data that you can grab from them, and you can respond if the technology works fast enough and has enough power to handle it. You can respond in real time or close to real time, not really real time, but close to real time to that customer by personalizing the offers that you're suggesting, the offers that you're providing. Say, okay, well, yeah, we have 78 things, but you know what? These are the 14 that are really, really important to you, judging from all the data we now have about you, given the journey you've just undertaken. And today, we'd like to give you these 3 if you want to take advantage of this thing here, right? And the customer says, oh, yeah, that's actually a pretty good deal. I like that, and I want that anyway. So that scenario is doable. I can tell you example after example after example and story after story about who does it. Dialogue Axiata, the telco in Sri Lanka, and Chief Customer Officer Sandra De Zoiza does it. As you and I talked about prior to the broadcast, the gaming industry is doing stuff like that all the time.
Yeah,
right. Amazing. And
amazing.
Most advanced example of anywhere in the world. Virgin Trains did it, right? I can give you case studies, but the key to the idea is, even within constraints, there's enough things that can be offered in common that will satisfy the self-interest of a large part of the total customer base and still let them feel as if they're getting a personalized offer of value. They're still being presented with a personalized offer of value, right?
Yeah. That's
the Commonwealth of Self Interest. Right? I've actually had that title for 12, 13 years. I always wanted to write a book with the title. That's another reason I wrote it. Right? I just thought the title was so cool, but I could never figure out how to do anything with it. So I wrote a book.
Well, to me, what's interesting is the shift in brand, right? So it wasn't that long ago that we created a brand by spending a whole lot of money on media and coming up with, catchphrases and that kind of stuff. And we just used advertising, and it was all about frequency and reach, right? Now, the way that we build brands is how deep we can build a relationship with customers. And so we've seen that shift. And if you spend any time in the industry, which you obviously do a lot of as well, there's a lot of narrative about brand, right? There's a lot of talk about how you optimize brand. There's less talk today around how you measure for the effect of that. And one of the things I liked about the Commonwealth of Self Interest is you spend some time, I'm just going to make sure I get this right, in chapter 16 we looked at this notion of how we measure customer value. And you looked at a few different elements of that, from customer engagement value, customer lifetime value, customer referral value, customer knowledge value. You talked about the combination of customer feedback and customer collaboration. There's a whole lot of ways that we can measure value now, which is important again for the maturity of this space. Towards the end of that chapter, you started talking about customer brand value, which to me starts to fill this gap that's in the narrative a lot today around, how you actually measure the effect of optimizing a brand. I'd love just your thoughts on that. I know that a lot of the work was Mr. Kumar's in terms of
let me rephrase. All of the work was Mr. Kumar's.
All of the work was Mr. Kumar's.
I didn't invent it. All I did was take a very complex book and simplify it in a chapter. It took me a month to break it down. It was a really hard book.
And I bet it did. In terms then of, when you think about the Commonwealth Self Interest and the creation of brand and the measurement of brand investment and brand measurement, where do you see that today? What's your view on that?
What I'm about to say is only a semi-formed thing that I've been working on in the last month or two.
Okay.
About brand, because it's something that I'm not inventing, but at the same time is very underemphasized. Actually, if you look at historically, brand is driven by what you said earlier, right? It's basically driven by marketing about products and
right.
To a target market that they're trying to appeal to, and they're painting a picture. Which is fine, but now, because of the way the things are evolving, and especially on the consumer side, to me, you have to start looking at brand as not the picture of a company, an established picture that painted with its color, but it's effectively the personality of a company. Brand personality is what's going to drive brand, right? Meaning, now there's a lot of implications in brand personality when I say that. And again, I'm not inventing a new concept here. I'm hopefully taking it further and making it more important to companies than it has been. Mark Benioff, aside from being CEO of a highly successful company, is arguably the world's greatest marketer, regardless of any company. Thanks to him, he established the tone and tenor of a whole industry, right? If you're in the customer-facing world, one of the pieces of advice I give every client I have is that they have to be more theatrical. And right. I'm not kidding when I say it, as funny as it sounds. I'm not joking in the slightest. I'm basically saying you have to establish a brand personality that when someone meets the people, sees what you do, watches you on the internet, watches you on social channels, sees you on television, looks at your products, uses your product, talks to you about a service, that personality shows. That if somebody says effectively, and I don't mean this is the personality because it's too bland, but when they say, oh, such and such a company, and they go, yeah, that company's so cool, there's a lot behind that word cool. And in fact, that they were like, for example, years ago, one of the things HubSpot did was they used to do these music videos online, and they had a very good woman. One of their female employees was a really good voice, and she would like sing these kind of these music video or Broadway-ish, depending on the mood of the day, song that they made up. The lyrics were terrible, but the song was establishing a personality for the company. And if you went to HubSpot, you actually went there, which is for me not a good thing, but when I say you'll understand why, their rooms, the rooms that they worked in, were all named after Boston sports teams. There's most of my dire enemies, right? So, and the personality of the company, which at the time needed to be young, was really important, right? And it established HubSpot as this young, cool, kind of hip company that was bringing out this and that and the other thing, and they became wildly popular doing what they did. Now you look at Salesforce today, for example. The brand personality of the company the genius of the company is around the externalization of their culture. Look, they're a big company and they have bureaucracies like every other big company, like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Salesforce. They all have bureaucracies. They're big companies. They're huge, right? They're so big, they're bound to have them. That are not, they're routinized and process driven and put process before people at times, and those things happen. However, the actual brand personality of Salesforce is their culture. Salesforce is the Apple of the enterprise industry, right? They have fans. Salesforce has fan boys and girls, or fan men and women. I guess they're old enough to be that, and right. But that's what I'm saying. That's a personality. Zoho. Look at them. They're on a massive rise. They have a huge personality. Their personality is defined by doing good, period. Even more so than Salesforce, right? Their personality is defined by doing good. Every company either has a personality or is bland, right? There are a lot of bland companies that don't have much personality yet that can. They have to find out what it is. And it doesn't require you to be hip and young and cool. It just requires you to find the same way. Look, you, for example, are a great writer, as I have told you, right? You truly are. Your guest post to me was an amazing surprise. I didn't know you were as good a writer as you are. But the thing that makes you a great writer is that your personality comes out in the writing, and that's your voice. Now, you translate that to an institution, a brand, right? That's brand personality, right? That their voice as a company comes out in everything they do as a brand, in the culture, in the marketing, in the sales process, and that they have something that somebody can point to, and when they think about it, can feel something about it and remember. Another example on how that works, just in terms of impression in the world. I've always been very big on user conferences. I think they're extremely important because they basically define not just the direction, but the feeling about the company over a 12-month period till the next one. Right? So, for example, if I say to you, the main theme of Sapphire in 2014, you'll say, well, I don't remember, but that was a great conference. You'll always remember how you felt about it, but you'll never remember what it was about. That's part of brand personality. That's how it shows itself. You said, I met some amazing people. You'll remember that. I'll say, well, who? And you say, I don't remember their names. Right? But I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Actually, brand personality is when a company can establish that feeling about them that's highly distinct and defined somewhat differently than the next company's brand personality. Again, it's half formed in me. I think it's where brand has got to go, given that we move very much to a right brain. So, and it's not as much in my book, but it's implied in the book around brand experience.
Yeah, it's an interesting space because, like everything that starts to get adopted, we first adopt it in a pillar or a silo somewhere, right? So you'll hear people talk about tone of voice and perhaps their social channels,
right?
But the way that their salespeople behave are completely different, and the experience in the contact center is completely different, and the way that the product is presented to market is completely different. Exactly. And so you've kind of got a marketing view of tone of voice. It's not institutionalized. It's not organic, right? And it's taking that leap, which is, look, you're talking about culture, right? It's always the hardest thing to do in any business, yeah?
And the most important thing to do is define the culture in a way that presents the company for the benefit of its employees and its customers and those who don't know it in the best possible way to make people want to engage. I mean, this is just a side, but a pet peeve that goes to some of this over here. I always have these people who say, I always ask them, so what's your strategy and your roadmaps like? They say, well, we operate somewhat opportunistically. We do what the customers ask us to do. And I always tell them, what is wrong with you when you say that? I said, you realize something? They're already your customers. You should be starting to talk to the people who aren't and find out what they need you to do. Right? Yeah. I said, your customers are your customers. They're going to give you what they need, but already being your customer. You want to just keep them the rest of your life and just keep listening to them. And I said, what you really need to do is listen to the people who aren't even your prospects yet. Right? So I said, start talking to them and finding out what your next steps are. It just drives me insane that people always tell me they think it's a virtue that they do what their customers ask. The other side, honestly, the customer's not always right.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
that's right.
Again, we're dealing with humans with foibles and
100%. And the other, that's why I'm so interested, or why I bring a lot of the social sciences into my work, is that we're in the midst of massive societal change. And when you ask a customer today what they think, they will tell you based, of course, like all of us, on their experience, which is yesterday's news, right?
Exactly
There's always a lag there, and you've got a massive changing society. You have to have regard for what's happening outside of that bubble. And so, you know, in some ways, you know, this speaks directly to what you're talking about with brand personality, because unless you can create fluid conversation, you're going to miss things. You can't do this in a campaign, right? It's got to be programmatic, and even more so, it's got to be cultural.
And see, that goes to a very interesting point too, which on the level of the company at the, let's call it the global marketing side, but if you can define a brand personality, it also helps you define your corporate narrative. Most companies fail at corporate narratives. They're terrible at them. I don't think a single one of the big four has a really good corporate narrative. I think Peg is the best, but it's the same deal. You have a strong corporate personality, your corporate narrative gets defined for you, right? I mean, you don't really have to it's not a struggle, because basically what it is the story of your corporate personality, right? And storytelling is what drives all of this. People need to hear about things in the metaphors that they think, right? That's the one thing that I think people miss a lot of, which is we're all, as individual and self-interested humans, we think individually, and we have metaphors that are different than the next person's and how we think every day. And as a brand or an institution, we have certain things we need to get across to those individuals. And I've taught teams this over the years, and it's always this is one thing I am absolutely certain I'm 100% right on. The job that we each have as individuals representing something is to get across our idea in their metaphor, right?
Yes.
Because if you get across your idea in your metaphor, guess who you're talking to? Right? Yourself. If you're subsuming your idea to their metaphor, then you're diminishing the importance of what you're saying, right? So ultimately, your idea is important, but you have to understand how they're thinking and then get it across. It's why day in the life videos are important. It's why storytelling is so important, because people can relate to it. And that's all it really means. If someone walks out and listens to a visionary statement and says, I get that, then you did it right, right? Yeah. As soon as they said, I get that. If they listened to a visionary statement and said, well, that was nice, and walk away, then it was just science fiction. Nothing else was beyond that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it goes beyond tone of voice. It gets to a deeper point of how you understand worldviews, right?
Yeah.
And this is why again, social science is so important. It's why I use futures, the study of futures, a lot in my work, and we've got great interviews here coming up around that particular subject. And professor of futures and multi-time author on the subject, developed a thing called causal layered analysis, which speaks to metaphors and worldviews and things like this around stakeholder management. And I love a lot of those concepts of how you apply them to growth. So that'll be an interesting one too. Now, I know, Paul, that you're not a big fan of predictions, and neither am I. But I know as well you've got a good sense of the history and the evolution of where we've been. You're already calling out things like brand personality, and so not so much whether irrespective of whether you think the industry will adopt something, but do you see anything that you think is really important that will change the shape, or that we've really got to get our heads around, perhaps something that's not necessarily new, we've just failed to get there so far, in the next decade you think will just be critical?
Well, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't have written the Commonwealth of Self Interest if I didn't think that they have to get their heads around customer engagement as an organized strategic imperative at the company, not just give engagement and CX lip service, which is what most companies are doing. A lot of what passes for this stuff isn't this stuff. It's just it's selfish interested, meaning it's the institution trying to figure out what's best for it, right? Even if it's at the expense of a customer. It's process before people, if you want to really simplify the whole thing. That kind of behavior needs to die.
Right.
It needs to die. It needs to be absolutely dead. And if you need to, the metaphor needs to be processed, and create an exceptions process. You have to, right? So that you can get around it. But one way or the other, that kind of behavior, look, we're in a world now where customer behavior is the driver of everything, right? Meaning, you've seen Forrester, I think, and I don't know about Gartner, but Forrester calls it the year of the customer. I call it the year of, I don't really call it anything, but I call it, it's the year, for me, it's becoming the year of engagement. You have, the year of experience, blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, it's a lot of the right brain, right, being activated when it comes to how we treat each other and customers. And that is the mission critical imperative of the next decade. And all the things that imply. When it comes to tech, it's going to be AI and machine learning and analytics and engagement analytics particularly, and customer journey orchestration and tracking, and it's going to be the traditional core operational things you need to do to make your business run. But the thing where business is going to have to step out is by developing strategies and programs that will keep customers fully engaged in a way that's beneficial to everyone. Actual action. Large handfuls of companies are doing it well. Yep. Larger handfuls are at least trying to do it. But it's not en masse yet. Yeah. So next decade, that's the imperative, really. And, maybe it'll be done sooner in a decade, maybe not. I have no way to do that. I deliberately don't do forecasts anymore. Yeah. Usually they're wrong, and they're wrong from everyone. In fact, what I would love to see between now and 2030 is no more forecasting.
Yeah. Well, Paul, this has been fun and always insightful. I love talking to you. And
you too.
The thing that I think anyone that listens to you speak, or reads your column or tunes into CRM players and folk, you got to do that. You still have to wear a hoodie to watch CRM players, Paul? Is that still the rule?
We want people to wear hoodies.
Wear a hoodie.
The only hoodie you're not allowed to wear is the New England Patriots. You don't even get on the show if you root for them. You can root for the Red Sox. In fact, we've actually had the Red Sox CRM guys on the show.
I think the thing I would say is that when people tune into those things, they hear an irreverent voice, a guy that talks straight, but they also hear a pretty big heart. And I just wanted to close by just asking you to share your advice. If you're leaving something with the folk today, and literally it can be anything, a bit of life, a bit of CRM strategy, a bit of whatever you think you'd like people to remember.
Look, you know what? Many years ago, I was asked by this young mentee of mine, how do I get to be like you? And he said, like the alpha CRM guy and blah, blah, blah. I said, well, whatever. I said, if my epitaph actually reads, he was number one in CRM, that is a truly crappy epitaph. I said, if my epitaph reads, he was a good person who tried hard to be good to others, I had a good life. And to me, as hokey and cheesy as that might sound, that is the reality of it. Ultimately, you try to be good to other people. You try to help them where you can. You try to provide them with comfort if they need it. You try to provide them with the goodness that your heart allows you to provide. People and animals, by the way, too. To me, at least, you'll be leading a life that will satisfy your interest in being happy. And that's the best and the most I can ever say. How that path goes, up to you. But
good advice. Good advice. Very human advice, and really appreciate it, Paul. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for your insights and for hanging out. And until I see you again, peace to you and your family and your 400,000, your platoon of cats.
And peace to you, sir. And I will and meows from all those cats.
You've been listening to Evolve with Aarron Spinley. To ensure that you never miss an episode, please subscribe on YouTube or on your favorite podcast player. Thanks so much for hanging out. Until next time.